Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host this afternoon, Shellon, Washington. And today we're going to be discussing a client of mine. The family came to our office, and this involved a young man from Guyana. He's of Guyanese descent. He was killed in Florida by the Sarasota Police Department. A police officer is responsible for his death. So today we will be discussing what happened to Rubiano. His name was Rubiano Johnson. And as I said before, we will be discussing, and in order to discuss what happened in this case in the Sarasota County in Florida, I will be joined by my colleague, James Williamson, as we break this down for you guys and we discuss the death of this young man. The family is looking for justice, and we do hope that something could be done in the near future to bring a closure to this case, and the family will get some sort of justice. Nothing was done, no investigation was done into the circumstances surrounding the death. It's really, or highly, I should say, highly suspicious as it relates to the circumstances. The sister of the deceased was supposed to be here this afternoon, but unfortunately, she cannot be here. So on another occasion, we're going to try to have her here. And I believe she has done several videos about this on TikTok. If you look Rubiano, the story about Rubiano Johnson, you should see his sister Latifah Johnson speaking up about this. And a journalist from the state of Florida is about to publish a news article about this. People need to know who Rubiano Johnson is. They need to know about this story, because it's one of those situations where he was killed wrongfully and this was just swept under the rug, and no justice has been served to the family. And they're still searching for answers as to how their 27-year-old son or brother was arrested and ended up dead 3 days later. The police in Sarasota County is responsible for this, and they're asking for answers. They wanted to see, what and if anything can be done about this. They're looking for justice. Sarasota County is responsible. Sarasota County Police Department is responsible. And the particular officer in question is Dale Ellis. And the family of Rubiano Johnson would like justice. Joining me this afternoon is my colleague, James Williamson, and we're going to be discussing this. Like I said, we're going to try to see as best as we can what could be done. And you should call the Sarasota County and tell them we want justice for Rubiano Johnson. He is dead. He died in November 19th of 2022, and this is now 2024. We're almost running into 2 years, and nothing has been done. No one has been answerable for the death of this young man. Joining me, James Williamson here today.
Washington, how's everything going?
It's going well, and it's a pleasure to have you here on this show
Thank you.
today as we discuss the killing of Rubiano Johnson in Sarasota County in Florida. Now, I know you are aware a little bit about the circumstances surrounding this death. Let me break it down just really quickly to the audience so they will know the circumstances surrounding his death. This young man live in Florida. His family's from New York. His mother, sister, everybody else is in New York. He went to work in Florida. And during the time he was working in Florida, he became a licensed firearm holder. He held a licensed firearm. So what happened is he went to the club, and the security, he brandished the firearm to the security, and they called the police. The police came, the police verified that the firearm was indeed licensed, but I do not have the details as to why he was still charged. He was charged, it was taken to court, and I was told that he missed the court date that he was supposed to appear in court. I'm not sure how that notice was served, but apparently they're claiming a notice was served. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind, at the time the notice was served, he was living with his girlfriend, but he eventually left. They separated and he began living in his own apartment. So I'm not sure if the notice was served at the wrong apartment. I can't tell you. The sister would have been better able, but she's not here this afternoon. Anyway, he missed the court date and the affidavit. So they have an affidavit of probable cause was that this was provided to the family, explaining the circumstances under which they were proceeding to arrest him. An arrest warrant was issued after he missed the court date, and the officer did write an affidavit of probable cause, which is dated 11/16, the same day that he was arrested. This is Officer Dale Ellis. Dale Ellis, in his affidavit of probable cause, stated that he went to the home of the deceased person, now deceased, Rubiano Johnson, and he said he saw the vehicle parked outside. He saw movement in the vehicle, but he went closer to make sure it wasn't from the trees, but it wasn't shadow movement, but it was actually someone in there. Then he noticed Rubiano Johnson exiting the car from the driver's side. And as soon as he saw, the police officer said when he noticed him, he started to run. Now, the police officer claimed that he pursued Rubiano Johnson, chased him, and he eventually deployed his taser to stop. He said he made several warnings or shout to Rubiano Johnson asking him to stop. He claimed that Johnson ignored his commands and he continued to run on foot. He said he fled west from his yard. He said after he deployed the taser, the story is Rubiano fell on his face with his arms out, and he proceeded to put the handcuffs on Rubiano Johnson. Once he put the handcuffs on Rubiano Johnson, he claims that Rubiano continued to move. He continued to kick his legs. He continued to, it's just legs movement at this point because obviously his hands are in handcuff. And the police officer, Dale Ellison, says he proceeded to deploy a second round of his taser in Rubiano's back. I'm not sure why, because if he's already restrained in handcuffs, I'm not sure what would be the need for another set of the taser, to deploy the taser again. But James Williamson, from your experience as a criminal law attorney, what are some of the circumstances you think a taser or even using deadly force, because the audience need to understand that a taser amounts somewhat to deadly force, because it's possible for a victim to die from the use of a taser. Could you tell the listeners what are some of the situations you believe a taser should be used or any form of deadly force by a police officer?
Well, certainly not a situation where somebody's already on the ground in handcuffs. You know, that definitely wouldn't rise to the level of having to use that type of force. I would say that force is excessive. I mean, here in New York, if I had a client like that, I would say that that would be an argument, as to whether or not excessive force was used. And what I'm talking about specifically is he had handcuffs on, so um, I believe if somebody was trying to run away, even that, I mean, I wouldn't use a taser on somebody immediately if they were just trying to run away. I mean, you would imagine that a chase would ensue first. A lot of times when you see a police officer using the taser, that's when they can't calm somebody down. Maybe they might have some mental health issues. And from what you said in the introduction, it doesn't sound like there was any indication that he might have had mental health issues and couldn't be calmed down, couldn't listen, couldn't follow instructions. But the main point here is that it sounds like this gentleman already had, Mr. Johnson already had handcuffs on. So, I mean, I really don't understand why a taser had to have been used on this gentleman, especially in his back.
Right. So that is the story in the probable cause affidavit, but the family tells a different story. And one of the things which the audience need to pay attention to is the police officer said he ran to his backyard. So if the accused person, or who is now deceased, by the way, because he died immediate, like 3 days after this incident,
Right.
if he's running into his backyard, that seemed to me, that tells me he's probably running to safety, because at this point, Officer Dale Ellis must have known that Rubiano Johnson was licensed to carry a firearm. So he wasn't a danger, because otherwise, who would authorize somebody to have a firearm license if they were determined to be dangerous? And from the stories we got from the family, the information we got from the family is that this guy never had no runnings with the law. He had no prior records on him. There was no issue whatsoever. And I think on that basis, or on the basis that he had a clean record, he was legally issued a firearm. And on this particular day, Dale Ellis went to carry out the arrest, and he claims on this probable cause affidavit that after Rubiano Johnson began to flee, he deployed his taser into the back. Now, one of the problem is about deploying the taser in the back, and the affidavit is going to be released to the public. I want everyone to see what the affidavit says. I'm going to redact a few portions, but I'm going to release the affidavit on my webpage, on Washington Law Firm's webpage, so you guys can see what the officer was saying about the entire situation leading up to the arrest. Now, he said that there was an injury in the lower back of Rubiano Johnson after he deployed this taser. He removed the residue or whatever is left over when you deploy a taser, and part of it was hooked in I think he said the basketball shorts that the victim was wearing at the time. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't seem to me at the time that Rubiano Johnson was presenting a danger to the public, to himself, or anyone around him, especially, like you said, it seems or it appears that he was running. So if he's running, I'm not sure how does this presents a danger to the public. I'm not sure how is it of public interest that any officer should use deadly force on a fleeing person, a person who is running, which seems to be somebody might be running for their lives, because in the county that he's in, it's known that a lot of the officers in that county are racist, very prejudiced. Even after the family learned of this situation, they couldn't even go to that county to figure out what are the circumstances surrounding the death of their loved ones. They met obstacles, oppositions. They weren't even allowed to go ask questions at the hospital. They were afraid. They tried contacting attorneys in that county. No one would help them. They tried to sue the county. They couldn't find any attorney who was willing to take on this case in this county. So one of the problem is upfront with being able to sue the county of Sarasota. They were not able to get an attorney who was willing to represent them, who was willing to take on the sheriff department. Everyone seemed to be fearful. And even the clients, even the family, they're so afraid of going to Sarasota County to even get evidence or dispute issues that has arisen. The civil aspect of this has gone a waste. So now the family is basically attempting to get justice by telling their story to the public and hoping that somebody would be brought to justice, somebody would be taken to trial and serve some sort of prison sentence for what happened to Rubiano Johnson, because the story told by Dale Ellis, it doesn't add up. And my question is to you, James Williamson. In this case, where we know that Rubiano Johnson had no prior, and he was being arrest warrant was issued for the purpose that he failed to appear in court. It wasn't being arrested, it's not no other reason, just failure to appear in court. Do you believe that there was any threat to anyone when he was fleeing?
No, don't believe there was any threat. I can't imagine what the police officer would have said, but I mean, a threat would be if you knew that the person was a violent felon. A threat would be if the person was, presenting any threat of physical force to anybody around them. Like right now, it doesn't seem like there's any indication of that. I mean, so the only thing I can think is that the police officer would have known that he had a firearm. But then the problem with that is you already mentioned that it was a licensed firearm, correct?
Yes,
Right.
he
And I
was
think you already touched on that, right? The state of Florida, I understand, you know, um, you'll it's very hard to imagine that they would have given the license to somebody that a cop would have had a reasonable, expectation to believe would have posed a threat to him. So right now, I mean, what I'm hearing is that he was just running away and he was tased in the back. And that kind of reminds me of that case. I think it happened back in 2014, where a man was shot in the back after he ran away, and that police officer was actually prosecuted and put in prison. Now granted, this is a taser and not a gun, but the whole point is the guy's back was turned to him. He was running away. So I don't know what Florida's policy would have been on that, but um, is there any indication that they tried to chase him down first? Maybe tackle him to the ground? Just immediately the use of a taser, that seems excessive to
right.
immediately go to the use of a taser.
Right. And I believe that's what the family is concerned about, because the fact that he didn't pose any threat to anyone, he was trying
Right.
to flee rightfully because he's in a county that is it's known to be racist. There's a lot of white police officers in that county, and everyone knows that's not the county you want to be caught in, because you might end up the same way Rubiano Johnson ended up, which is dead. So he was fleeing for his life, fleeing for his safety. The officer deployed the taser. It stabilized him or stopped him. He fell on his face. The officer went ahead, put the cuffs on him, and proceeded to tase him again because he said his legs. And that's the other thing. What is the most likely reaction from a person who is tased? If their hands, you can't move your hands because they're in handcuff. What is the next likely type of reaction to get from a person who was tased in the body? And I think a lot of people don't recognize how dangerous a taser is. If you simply go to Google and you Google the effects of using a taser, one of the things is the likelihood is that it can be fatal, right? So what do you think, Mr. Williamson, would be the likely response from a person who is tased and you can't move your hands?
I think the response would be, and this is just common sense, because this answer is not even going to have anything to do with anything that I read in the law book, experienced in court. This is just common sense. If you get tased, I mean, you're probably going to kick your legs a little bit. Doesn't necessarily mean you're trying to resist. It's just a natural reaction to getting tased. I mean, that's an unnatural feeling. Most people you run into have never been hit with a taser before, you
Right.
know.
And you would believe Officer Ellis, Dale Ellis, would have been familiar with the reaction from a
Right.
victim who had been tased. But instead, he proceeded when the man did not pose any risk to anyone, but he was restrained. He proceeded to deploy the taser again, which
Hmm.
resulted in Rubiano Johnson being admitted to the hospital. He was hospitalized after that, and then it only got worse. He was
Right.
hospitalized at Sarasota Memorial Hospital, and things only got worse after that. Like I said, um, in the hospital, he began to show signs of a spinal cord injury. Now, what the family was told is that, he was overdosed on drugs while he was in the cell at the police station. They said they told the family he overdosed. Now, this is a person, Rubiano Johnson never used any drugs as far as the family is aware. He wasn't involved in any type of drugs or illegal drug use or for recreational purposes on any level. But the police claim that he was engaged in that and that he was suffering from some sort of overdose. But when you review the medical records, and part of the records will be made public. People need to see what happened to Rubiano Johnson. They need to know, and justice need to come to the family. The family need answers. They need justice, because for many, many months after his death, the police refused to release any of the information surrounding his death. The family were refused the arrest record. They were refused information as to what happened in the cell, or they refused to provide even footage of the arrest to the family. This only happened almost a year after, when they already knew that the statute of limitation had passed for the family to sue the county, because I believe in Florida, there's a 1-year statute to bring a claim against the municipality. And in this case, they refused to provide even the death certificate. It took a long time. And then the autopsy report, that's another situation. But the fact is, he showed signs of a spinal cord injury, even though the family was being lied to. The family was told it was a drug overdose, that it consumed some illegal substance. But there was no evidence of that on the medical report. The family have had doctors give them a second opinion on what they saw while Rubiano Johnson was admitted at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital. And there's absolutely no evidence of having any drug in his system. He was killed. He was killed by Dale Ellis. He was murdered. But no one will tell the family what happened. They refuse to provide this information to the family. And the family is still asking for answers. And even when the body was sent to New York for them to bury the body, it came covered with a white substance. The family don't even know what that white substance is. They couldn't see they couldn't see the wound. Nothing was visible. The white substance covered the entire body, and they refused to allow the family to view the body while it was in Florida. The family was refused access to anything that surrounded the death of Rubiano Johnson. And now they're asking for answers. They're asking the public to call the Sarasota Police Department and tell them that you want justice for Rubiano Johnson. You want the officer who's responsible for this to be brought to justice. He must be charged with murder, because the circumstances doesn't quite explain why was he tased? Why was he tased multiple times? Why was he even arrested? I mean, I understand that he missed the court date, and maybe that was the reason for the arrest. But it's hard to even understand how is he dead 3 days after the arrest, and why. And no answers are being provided. They refuse to explain to the family. And the affidavit of probable cause seems to be a cover-up of the truth of what really happened. Back to you, Mr. Williamson. As I said before, we don't believe the taser was used rightfully, right?
No.
Do you?
Not on those facts.
Do you believe that a taser, if a taser was deployed, right? Do you believe there is the possibility? I mean, you're not a doctor, but this is just your opinion based on what you've heard about this case. Do you believe it's possible for a taser to amount to any sort of spinal cord injury? Or you believe the story that the police is saying that a young man was overdosing on some sort of drugs?
The operative word in that question was possible. Yes, I do believe that it's possible. I mean, just like you said, I mean, I'm sure deaths have occurred from tasers before. I can't give you a percentage. I would imagine that it's not the likelihood. It all depends on the the amount of force that was used on Mr. Johnson in this one occasion. You spoke about a drug overdose too, So what's more likely that he died in the hospital 3 days later, you said, right? Three
Yes.
days after the arrest. So another thing I would look into would be whether or not, what type of drugs did he have in his system that would have caused him to die from an overdose 3 days later, And if that answer is, it makes it less possible that he would have died 3 days later after having taken, because I'm sure he wasn't taking drugs after he got arrested. I'm sure that's not the case.
That's not
Um,
the case at all.
right. So, that leaves a number of possibilities. The most likely one that I would look into is, okay, well, maybe it was the taser. He had a spinal cord injury right around the area where the taser hit him, correct?
Yes.
All right. So how
Yes.
long was he tased? I would want to know that information. And
Exactly.
and what's the reason if he was running
Exactly.
away?
And there's no evidence on the probable cause affidavit that tells you the length of time the officer tased the victim for. But there's another thing that people need to know. There are video recordings, there are body cam that shows immediately after the tasing, they put the victim on the side of the road to sit next to the police car. And he is visibly hurting. If you can see the videos, which I will release to the public, I will release those videos. People need to see what happened. He was begging for water. They didn't give him any water. He didn't show any signs of a overdose. No signs, absolutely none. Because if a person is under the influence, you will see some sort of the signs, or you will hear it in their voice.
Erratic behavior,
Yes,
right?
yes, you will notice that there's something that doesn't seem right. But coincidentally, while he was sitting on the side of the road, from the body cam footage, there's no sign that he was under the influence of anything. There's
Right,
no sign showing you that this man was under a drug overdose, or he wasn't frothing, he wasn't experiencing any seizure. There's no sign, absolutely no sign of anything that could have convinced the public that he must have died on his own doing. But rather they had him, it was visibly shaken from what had happened to him, and it looked like something was definitely wrong, but definitely not a drug overdose or anything of
right,
the sort. And their claims is that he had the drug while he was in the cell. And you got to ask yourself a question: how is it that he have access to drugs in a cell? Who is giving him the drugs? Where is it coming from? Because as you know, a person is searched before you are booked, and anything that you have on your person is taken by the officer who books you. So there's no possibility that you could enter into a jail cell with drugs on you. So that right there doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. So at that point, they said he started showing signs that something was wrong while he was in the cell, and he was sent to the hospital. And if he was sent to the hospital, why is he gone 3 days after on a drug overdose? As you know, drug overdose doesn't take a long time to take effect. It gets into the system very quickly. And for people, even people who drink alcohol, Mr. Williamson, even alcohol, you would know that that gets very quickly into your system, right?
right.
So
And then,
the
of course, it depends on how much, but yes, it's not going to happen. I wouldn't imagine 3 days later.
Yeah, but for a drug overdose to kill a person 3 days later, that doesn't seem very plausible, does it?
I would have to see, well, first off, was he taking drugs at all? That's the first issue, you know. So we don't know that. That was just an allegation, right? They don't
Right.
have any toxicology report, right?
And like I said before, the family said no, and the medical
Right,
record doesn't show any signs of any drug overdose in his system. The autopsy report, same thing. The only thing that is seen on the medical report is sign of his spinal cord injury. That's what appears to be on the medical. And if you want to see what the symptoms are for a spinal cord injury, it's simple. You could just Google that. A lot of things are available on the internet, or you can talk to a medical professional who have experience dealing with that type of injury, and they'll be able to tell you all the symptoms, all the signs and the symptoms, which are not the same as a drug overdose, by the way. It's not the same. So the possibility of Rubio Johnson dying from a drug overdose is not likely. And I think the public need to know, the family need justice, the family need answers. And we're hoping somehow that something is done and that Dale Ellis is made to answer charges for murder, for the murder of Rubiano Johnson. All right. So somebody needs to answer for this murder. Somebody needs to pay for it, and the family needs justice. All right.
Yes, they do.
So, having said that, Mr. Williamson, we're already half an hour past into the program. This is a 30 minutes program, The Law and You. Today we were discussing the death of a Guyanese man, Rubiano Johnson. His family's from Guyana. He's from Guyana. He's born in Guyana, raised in New York. Went to the state of Florida for employment purposes. This was his first incident with the law, and he ended up dead 3 days after.
27.
Yes, dead at 27, no medical condition whatsoever. The only thing that we know, he was tasered twice, and an injury resulted, which was visible on the outside of his body, and he ended up dead. So the family.
One more question, Ms. Washington. I apologize for cutting you off, but we have no idea what happened inside the prison cell either, from what you're telling me after he was tased.
No, we don't have any information except for the few videos showing that he was booked. He was sitting alongside the road. He was asking for water. They called the EMS. He ended up in the hospital later, and because the injury was so severe, he ended up dead. The hospital couldn't save him.
Well, look, my heart goes out to the Johnson family, to his sister and everybody else. And I hope that the Johnson family gets justice for young Mr. Rubiano Johnson, who was taken away from everybody too soon.
Right. Thank you so much, James Williamson, for your input into this. And I'm pleading with the public that you share this video, share this live, let people know. We want the world to know about this Rubiano Johnson story, yes, and we want the officer Dale Ellis to be made to face charges for the murder of Rubiano Johnson. There's no statutes of limitations on this. So even if it take another year, he must be prosecuted for what he has done, because Rubiano Johnson, at the time he was arrested, did not pose a danger to anyone, and it should not have resulted in his death. We shouldn't be having this conversation right now. He should have been alive with his mother, his sister, his family. Should not have been dead. But unfortunately, he is gone, and the family needs justice. Once again, this is The Law. You've been watching The Law and You. Thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon. Press the like button, share this live, and make sure that this message gets out to as many people as possible. And I'll see you again next week at the same time, 4 o'clock, for The Law and You. The Law and You is brought to you by the Washington Law Firm. Our office is located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. The phone number is 718-877-3100. Thank you so much again, guys, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you, James Williamson.
Thanks for having me, Ms. Washington.